simplistic definition of postmodernism would be a number of trends or movements in the arts and literature developing in the 1970s in reaction to or rejection of the principles and practices of established modernism. Many philosophers find it hard to theoretically define postmodernism, and in fact it's just easier to know the difference between modernism and postmodernism. The difference is that modernism incorporates in more logical, rational thinking and was more of an objective and analytical practice, while postmodernism denies logic and is more subjective. Just to know the simple definition of postmodernism isn't enough, but instead a brief history is required to fully understand its complexity. Postmodernism was well-lived during its time in the 1970s and stuck with its relatively local boundaries without spreading its trends too far. It was also looked at as a rebellion against modern ways of thinking and design. The core ideas of postmodernism in architecture were to bring back elements of the past, such as Gothicism, Renaissance, and Baroque styles. The intent to revive these old styles was to fix the modernist thinking that disregarded human needs.
Our first example of postmodernism is the work of architect Charles Moore and how he connects to both modernism and postmodernism. Charles Moore is considered very much educated in both categories. He takes his influences from modernists like William Worcester and Louis Kahn and turns the table on their design in order to form new postmodern techniques. Charles searched for ways to manipulate color, light in both exterior and interior space in order to create a certain sense of space for the users of his creations. He believed that the building is a receptacle for human energy and that all the buildings deserve a creative and intelligent energy so that they can give the best experience to its inhabitants. We see here Charles Moore's intentions of light and color coming alive when he designs the Piazza Italia in New Orleans, which was created with the intention of inclusive architecture, which could speak to or be enjoyed by any user, which is how he incorporated his postmodern ideas. Moore uses the references from Italian cities, which he then distorts with color and materials in a way that so resembles Italy's past styles of architecture, but evokes strong emotions. Light also plays a significant role across the surface of this entrance and the multiple views and approaches that the user can create a complex spatial experience.
Now we move on to our next example, who is known as a postmodern architect and product designer, Michael Graves, with his large-scale office buildings, tea kettle pots, and playfulness with color and designs. If we take a look at the Portland building, we can see that he showed how the next step for postmodernism was designing things with large space and intentions. Many postmodernism works prior to this building were small, private works, and this building was the first large-scale project designed for the everyday public. It was a fun and cheerful installation, not contrasted with the strict, fast-paced culture that comes with city life. Many aspects of the exterior were designed based off of classical elements. The facade specifically was designed based off of classical anthropomorphic orders that intend to represent the base, the body, and the head. After this building is when Philip Johnson, who had mentored Graves, came out with his design for the AT&T building. Michael Graves was also well known for his niche in product design, in particular for his design form of a tea kettle pot. His main goal with this design was to bring the users joy, instead of just having a functional use of squealing when the water is boiling. This tea kettle sings as if it is a whistling bird. It also allows water to boil faster, since it has a wider base. His tea kettle was so popular that it led to Graves designing over 150 products. Finally, to get a good sense of Michael Graves' effect on postmodernism, we take a look at his work in interior design at Temple University in Philadelphia at the Fox School of Business. The design of this interior was intended to enforce and encourage the making of small learning communities. In these communities, the students could come together with faculty, peers, and the business community. Each level in this building has stairs and spaces that allowed for this interaction among people. This follows the postmodernism idea because the building was specifically designed in order to meet the needs of people and how they interact, not just a building that fulfills its general function.
Our final example of postmodernism will include the works of Philip Johnson. In the design for the AT&T building, which is considered one of the first major monuments of postmodernism, Johnson took a typical modern-style building and placed an antique ornamental element on top of the building. This element that played such a huge role on the design of the building was known as Chippendale Highboy. Johnson continued this idea of taking a modernist building and topping it with an element that had a more classical approach with his South LaSalle building. In this building, the classical element had enhanced the building with a Gothic peak roof. This was known as double coating. This whole design idea makes these works postmodern because they still have many elements of modernism design. However, Johnson is incorporating elements from the past, such as the Gothic roof, into the building as well, which is what postmodernism centers around. Glass house, similar to a style like Mies van der Rohe, is another work done by Philip Johnson that clearly shows the ideas of postmodernism in its design. When the idea of an all-glass house came about, many modernist architects thought it would be impossible or very pointless. However, Johnson had no intention of people living in it. Instead, he intended on it to be a statement against the purely functional ways of traditional modernism. When one steps into the house, they would feel a sense of simplicity and purity.
Although postmodernism was short-lived, its time period in the history of architecture is still something that is looked back to and referred to this day. These three architects are the main revolutionary icons in this period that helped to bring postmodernism to where it is now. Moving through the short time that postmodern was lived, Philip Johnson made the first big move with his work on the Glass House, and then later on the AT&T building as well as the South LaSalle building. These two were the first steps incorporating postmodernism into large-scale urban buildings. With their obvious modern aspects as well as pieces from the past, they are clear postmodern designs. Charles Moore then introduced the Piazza d'Italia, and last Michael Graves with his Portland building as well as interior designs and his product designs. All these architects created large stepping stones on the time period of postmodernism and the principles and elements that they put together for their works that are still used today.